It's undeniable that women are and have always been held to strict expectations that guide and restrict the way that they are able to exist in the world. These expectations are extraordinarily striking when compared side by side, not only because they're so numerous, but because they're so varied. Undoubtedly the most shocking, though, is the extent to which these expectations contradict and conflict with each other. While it might seem counterintuitive or maybe just a poor organizational choice, their purpose becomes much more clear when we examine the stakes of these expectations. That is to say, the gravity with which they're perceived and the hostility with which they're upheld. In the end, these expectations are far more than just a simple organizational tool. They're an illogical and an impossible illusion of perfection. By virtue of the fact that fulfilling one expectation can disqualify you from another expectation, this multiplicity of conflicting expectations makes up a standard that can never be met. Because this standard is perceived as the unequivocal ideal, this system of multiple conflicting expectations consistently marginalizes and oppresses women, making them out to be failures and inadequate. The second sex has a really clear section that lays out some of the multiple expectations that women are held under, such as the expectation that woman is both Eve and virgin. This introduces one of the main conflicting expectations, the expectation that woman is supposed to be mother and therefore sexually active, and virgin, the innocent, doe-like, wholesome, pure creature. And a simple logical analysis just tells us that this is impossible. To become the mother, you have to have sex, and you're sacrificing your status as a virgin. And to remain a virgin, you're neglecting your duty to become a mother, because you're not having sex. Although this multiplicity of expectations might seem obviously flawed, it's upheld with surprising vigor and hostility. Take the writing of Gandhi, for instance, in which he states that Parliament is like a sterile woman and a prostitute. Here, Gandhi is trying to explain the extent to which British Parliament has failed as a government. When the comparison is looked at in reverse, however, it becomes an implication of Gandhi's expectation of women. Gandhi claims that a woman is akin to a failed state if A, she neglects her duty to have children by being sterile, or B, neglects her duty to be wholesome by becoming a prostitute. In the same way that the second sex identified two expectations that were wildly contradictory upon examination, this dual expectation is fundamentally unmeetable. To avoid the failure of neglecting to have kids, a woman must have sex, and thereby sacrifices her wholesomeness and purity. But if she tries to achieve the wholesomeness of virginity, then of course she's neglecting her duty to have kids. It's a classic catch-22. What is perhaps most jarring about Gandhi's dual conflicting expectation is the intensity with which it's presented, and the accusatory way in which it's framed. First and foremost is the very extreme language of sterile woman and prostitute. These words are, of course, the most extreme versions of failure in both motherhood and wholesomeness. In addition, Gandhi's presentation of this dual expectation is guided by the negative. By this, I mean that Gandhi's words aren't an assertion of what it is that he'd like to see in women. They are a very hostile and unsympathetic claim that if a woman fails to meet what's expected of her, then she's akin to a failed state. The execution of how these dual expectations are presented really drive home the weight and the pressure that they possess. They're by no means a suggestion. It's a powerful demand that has the ability to classify a woman as a total failure. Hamlet gives us a very, very important piece of the puzzle, how the women, the ones who are actually being held under these expectations, react to them. Throughout the play, Hamlet, the character, bombards Ophelia with these mixed signals which are, of course, manifestations of these dual and conflicting expectations. In Act 2, Scene 1, Ophelia's brother Laertes makes reference to Hamlet's long history of making flirtatious or even sexual advances toward Ophelia. This history of courtship is entirely flipped on its head by Hamlet in Act 3, Scene 1. In this scene, Hamlet rages about how women's downfall is their sexuality and their vanity, and in a manic rage he tells Ophelia to be thou as chaste as ice, as pure as snow, both contradicting himself and chastising Ophelia for the sexual and romantic interest that he had once encouraged. As it turns out, this dual expectation supplies a really nice explanation for the unendingly controversial line, "Get thee to a nunnery." Similarly to Ophelia, those people reading the play are presented with such contradictory ideas of sexuality and chastity, and can't really decipher a single meaning from the line. It just goes to show how absolutely nonsensical these dual contradicting expectations can be. If one is to rely on Hamlet's long history of encouraging Ophelia sexually, we might interpret the line to mean that she should embrace that side of herself and become a prostitute. But if we base our opinion on his polemic against female vanity and sexuality, then we'll understand him literally, actually encouraging Ophelia to become a chaste nun. Ophelia, too, is caught between these two explanations, and she becomes driven mad with anguish at her inability to fulfill both of Hamlet's desires. This anguish, of course, develops into leading her to her suicide. As I mentioned before, this practice of holding conflicting expectations goes beyond a poor organizational tool. It functions as a way to condemn women to inadequacy and failure, regardless of what they actually do. Of course, much of de Beauvoir's book is focused on the way in which woman is other, the fact that she's defined by the ways in which she is not like man. Women are sexual objects while men are sexual subjects. Women are reproducers while men are producers, and women are meek and feeble while men are independent and powerful. However, what's being identified in this prospectus is another degree of marginalization and oppression. Not only are women being put in these boxes of being not men, these boxes are fundamentally contradictory and impossible to fulfill. The moment you respond to a sexual advance, you're a slut. But the moment you say no to a sexual advance, you're a prude and you're not doing your duty to become a mother. The last chapter of de Beauvoir's book is focused on how women can close the inequality gap between men and women. With what I've discussed in this prospectus, I think a very important step in the marathon to equality is to identify the way that these expectations are fundamentally illogical, and note that. As Ophelia demonstrated, trying to fulfill these expectations is a doomed practice. By taking one step toward one expectation, you're just moving that much farther away from another expectation. It's a balancing act that's just going to lead to feelings of inadequacy and anguish. By unveiling the illogical mess that is this multiplicity of expectations, women can at least find relief in the freedom from this suffocatingly and furiously contradictory system.